Mr. Yang, first of all, other than media and consumer entertainment, drones have been more widely applied to a variety of non-traditional sectors, including agriculture and education in China. What are the reasons behind the popularity of commercial drones in the Chinese market?
Well, yes, the unmanned air vehicle has already become a very huge industry in China, not only in China but also in the whole world. I think that it is due to the development of technologies, make it more cheap and more easy to be used. For instance, the material processing technology and even the parts of the unmanned air vehicle can be made by 3D printing, and also due to the rapid development of the electronics, the chips on the UAV becomes more and more cheap, and also more easy to be controlled. You can even control a very small UAV by your mobile phone on the app, and also you can even find AVA sold as toys in the supermarket. So I believe it is because of the technologies, the development make it more cheap and more popular. On the other hand, there are also other reasons. You see there are concrete demands to the use of UAV, for instance, such as the after earthquake in Japan in 2008, the survey and the reconnaissance of the Fukushima, the heavily polluted area, can only be surveyed by the robots and the UAV. But also with the development, more and more photographers and other people use the UAV as a very powerful tool. So I think on both sides, from the manufacturing and also from the data usage, it become a more great industry.
Mr. Kaplan, the drone market has been experiencing a boost lately with the compound, for instance, with a compound annual growth rate of over 120%, according to market research firm International Data Corporation. China's civil aerial photography drone shipments are expected to reach 5.5 million by 2020, with consumer-level drones exceeding 3 million. Now, where does China stand among its global counterparts in the commercial drone market?
Yeah, well, China's an important part of the market. The United States has more of the market than any other single country, but by no means the majority of the market. China has 15–20% of the market, something like that. So obviously, given those global numbers that you mentioned, significant numbers of drones in China. And this, by the way, has really taken the world by surprise. The Economist reported not long ago that back in 2010, the Federal Aviation Administration in the United States expected that by the year 2020, so a few years from now, there might be 15,000 drones in the United States. Instead, more than that number are sold every month just in the United States. And so we're talking about very big numbers all over the world, and indeed in China.
Now, Seth, despite the convenience drones have brought to people's daily life, incidents like a lost drone crashing onto the White House lawn in 2015 have also caused concerns. Some say a drone capable of delivering a package to your door will also be able to be capable of delivering a small bomb. How are concerns of malicious uses of drones being addressed in the United States?
Yeah, you're right. And if you think about it, this is not so different from manned aircraft in the sense that, we all fly around on commercial jets. They do a lot of good for the world, but we're all well aware also of the exceptions to that when commercial jets have been used as weapons, such as in the terrorist attacks in the United States back in 2001, killed thousands of people. So yeah, it's a combination of regulations and education in the U.S. and most countries. There's a requirement to register drones. Having said that, not all are registered. China is engaging in an effort to crack down on illegal drones that aren't registered and that aren't complying with rules. Typically, a drone is not allowed to fly within a certain distance of an airport. It's not allowed to fly above a certain altitude, a rather low altitude of 120 meters or so, depending on the country. And commercial pilots are being educated. There are new guidelines about what to do in terms of looking out for drones and reporting them if they see them doing something wrong. Beyond that, obviously, intelligence agencies are all engaged in in this new threat that exists, because as you said, certainly just as it's become easier to do all these good things with drones, indeed, when people get their hands on them with bad intentions, just as with commercial aircraft, just as with the internet or other kinds of things that do a lot of good in the world, important to combat those threats. Governments are doing it,
sure.
And airlines too are asking their pilots to do what they can.
Well, sometimes it's just pure accidents that can be caused. Mr. Yang, now one common concern is of drones wandering into protected airspace. For instance, earlier in April, as I mentioned, dozens of airplanes scheduled to fly to the city of Chengdu had to land at alternative airports after drones were sighted flying in the protection zone. Now, the Chinese government is also aware of the problem and has rolled out some corresponding regulations. Here is a very quick look. Now, the Civil Aviation Administration of China introduced provisional regulations on the operation of drones. Looser restrictions were unveiled for rural or less populated areas, while major cities such as Beijing and Shanghai have much stricter regulations, especially for drones weighing more than 7 kilos. Now, in Beijing, there is a no-fly zone in most part of the city inside the 6 ring road, including the 3 airports. However, industry players complain that the restrictions will contain the development of drones. How do you respond to this?
Well, I agree to have more restrictions to this kind of activity. You know that every day we take airplanes to go to everywhere of the world, but still, although the air flight has already been very practical, but still because the airplane is a very complex machine, the more complex it is, the more possible to have some malfunction, and it is a very fragile to some extent. It's a very fragile machine, and even not only the UAV but also the birds near the airport can cause very serious problems to the safety of the airplane. So I think I agree with our guest in DC that we should not allow the users of the UAV to come too close to the airport, and also flying too high to the some area. And also I think this will not influence the development of this industry, because there are plenty of space for these kind of users to use their UAV.
Mr. Kaplan, drones disrupting flights is a headache for global airline companies. What are some of the countermeasures being taken by airline companies, in your knowledge?
Yeah, you're right. And to some degree, we don't know exactly what kind of damage they could do, because thankfully, we haven't yet seen a disaster, middle air collision that's perhaps brought down a commercial airline, or airliners, commercial airplanes are built to sustain certain kinds of things. A bird strike, for example, typically isn't going to bring down an airplane, but a drone that's full of metal and so forth, we don't know exactly what it would do. There was an incident in outside London where a British Airways aircraft had what seemed to be a mid-air collision with a drone, where its nose cone was damaged and the plane survived it. But it is a combination of all the regulations that we've spoken about, and just with continuing to educate pilots to be on the lookout for these threats. The problem is, I mentioned the incident in London. In that case, the drone was just flying so far above the altitude where drones are typically allowed to fly that, with everything else that pilots have to think about, it's really a last line of defense, the pilot having to address this. You really want these to be controlled through the regulations, through air traffic control, obviously, identifying if something goes on. What happened in Chengdu, I mean, look, in the end, at least they kept everybody safe there. But you really hate for it to have to come to that. In that case, you had tens of thousands of people inconvenienced, but at least their lives not threatened. But you could imagine something worse happening. And so good to see airlines and authorities getting out in front of this. But the threat is far from over. Have to continue what we've been talking about, kind of this two-pronged approach, letting the industry develop because it does a lot of good, but preventing the worst.
And especially when the drones are getting more and more powerful, also, with the smaller engine and possibly flying higher and faster. Mr. Yang, finally, what we discussed today reflects how the technology development in aviation is moving pretty fast. On the other hand, China is also witnessing great achievements in the aerospace sector. And today, by accident, marks the second National Day of Space Flight. And this year's celebration will focus on the applications of space technology in economic and social development. What's the timeline for China to become one of the world's aerospace leading countries, let's say?
Well, the China government has published the 2 versions of the white book of China Aerospace in these years. And because in the future we want to go to not only a big country but also an advanced country in the world, so we still have many things to do. We will build our own space stations as a national laboratory in space, and also we will have more in deep space probes, such as the Chang'e 5 lunar mission will have the sample return from the moon this year, by the end of this year. And next year or the year after next, we will have the first soft landing on the far side of the moon, which has never been done by other countries before. And for these years, we also have more satellites dedicated in scientific research, such as dark matter exploration and so on.